The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Yes, it's time for another week of The Clear Signal. Welcome, folks. I hope you've had a great week, and we're looking forward to a great show coming up. We've got a great hour ahead. We've got some great music and a couple of really great guests. Coming up a bit later in the show, we're going to be talking all things finance and budgeting with Australia's First Lady of Finance, Karen Hecht. And let's face it, in these challenging times, everybody's got finance and budgeting and all those sorts of issues on their mind. It doesn't really seem to matter from, what income level you're on. Everybody's feeling the squeeze right now. And boy, if you've been to the supermarket lately and seen some of the prices in there, it's just crazy. So Karen's going to come on and have a bit of a chat to us about, how to navigate some of those things, how to set up some budgeting strategies perhaps, and just get us through these, these tough times. And let's face it, folks, it's cyclical. We've all been through this before. If you're sort of my age, the tough times like this roll around, it seems to me, every 20 or 30 years in a cycle, and here we are again. So Karen's going to help us with that. But first, my first guest this week, and we're going to be talking, reminiscing about some great things in radio. She'll be someone who's familiar to most of you. If you're in the Melbourne radio market, certainly you will have heard her reading the news. She's had a long career as a journalist, as a writer, and more recently as a podcaster. And she's waiting on the line here, and I know she'll blush when I say this, but she's one of the nicest people I know. Hello, Sarah Patterson.
Oh, you are too kind. Hello, Steve. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Well, you're actually on my show every week, and people will be listening going, I know who that is. That's that lady that does the voiceovers on the Clear Signal.
Oh, gee, I don't know. I think you might be talking it up just a bit. But if people do remember my voice, that is lovely.
Now, this is going to be a bit weird because you and I have worked together in the news game for about the last 7 years or so, and you have taught me so much about the craft of news reading, and it's something that I don't think I really appreciated when I went into there. I was sort of, I'll nail this, hey, I'm a podcaster, I'll be able to do this, but it really is a craft, isn't it? And I just wonder what motivated you. You've had a long career, and what motivated you to get into that?
When I was at school, Steve, I was very good at English. I absolutely sucked at maths. I still do suck at maths.
Yeah, me too.
In fact, my maths ability is probably somewhere around, grade 2 level. I'm not ashamed to say, but I always loved to write, and I always loved creative writing, and I thought that would be the obvious career choice for me. But I never considered radio. I considered journalism. I thought perhaps I might end up writing for a newspaper. Perhaps I might try television journalism. But as it happened, I grew up down in South Gippsland, Victoria, and we still have a community station down here, which is now called South Coast FM. It was 3M FM back in my school days. I ended up getting roped into doing a few shifts at 3M FM here and there, and that sort of ignited my passion for radio. I was also studying for a media studies degree at RMIT. This is back in the late 80s, and there was a student radio. Yeah, I know. Remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
I was also working from time to time at the student radio station there called 3ST, and that kind of just fired up my interest in radio, and it went for there. After I graduated from RMIT, I landed my first commercial job soon after at 3NE in Wangaratta, and that was 1990. So wow. It's just sort of gone on from there.
3NE seems to be a real sort of, I was say breeding ground. That's not really the right word, is it? It's really somewhere that I remember a lot of people that you hear on radio more broadly over the journey between then and now all seem to have gone through there and done an apprenticeship of some kind.
You're quite right. A great dear friend of mine, Patrina Jones, who's now Christian O'Connell's show. She started at 3NE. In fact, we were both there together. That's where our friendship began. Troy Ellis started at 3NE. Right. Yep. Triple M. Ty Frost, I believe. Tony Jones from Channel 9 also famously began at 3NE.
Oh, I did not know that. Well, there you go.
There you go.
So my wife, who grew up in that region of the world, my wife sort of comes from around the Wangaratta type of area. She thinks you're all superstars because I know those people. I've listened to them all, and they all come through that particular station. So there you go.
It's a beautiful part of the world too. Loved my my couple of years in Wang.
So media studies is one thing, but news reading, now I know you've done a little bit of work on the television as well. Did it sort of spring from that?
Yeah, I decided to do a quickie 6-month course called, it doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. I wish it did. It's the wonderful Jim Barber ran a program at Swinburne University called the Commercial Radio Training Program. And we were all virtually back then sort of guaranteed a job in radio when we graduated. And the news reading part of it, it's just something I sort of fell into and got the hang of along the way. I've looked, and I'm not putting myself down here, I've never considered myself a great newsreader, but one thing I will say is that what I hope to do and what I hope I've achieved is that I've kind of put my own little individual stamp on my presentation style. I've always been a big believer, and you know that this, Steve, is that you need to inject your own personality into your read, not necessarily try and model yourself on other people, but just be yourself. And that's the motto I live by, just be yourself, because there's only one of you.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that, folks, because when I first started going, and all I had to really model my news reading style on, I guess, was people in Melbourne radio who, you know, I've listened to as newsreaders, and your Dennis O'Kane's of the world or your Tony Tardios. And I know Sarah would often say to me, you know, no, don't do that, just be you. And it's taken me a few years to do that, so I hope I've etched. But styles is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because FM radio news reading is certainly, there's a different style and perhaps a different motivation in the way they present it compared to, say, your AM talk stations.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's probably a bit more light and shade in your FM news read. I think there's equal warmth across both AM and FM. It's funny, Steve, you just made me remember I was working at Gold just a couple of years ago, and somebody sent an email saying that they really enjoyed my reading style and that I reminded them of a character called Aussie Man. I'm not familiar with this person, but I looked him up. Sort of like a Steve Irwin type bogan character. And I thought, do I take that as a compliment? Or but this lady said, no. She said, you sound really relaxed and you just sound really laid back, and that's what I really like to hear on the airwaves. And I thought, okay, well, I'll take that as a win.
Well, now you've worked with some big names in radio, and you've worked on many of the big brand name FM stations in Melbourne. I'm curious about morning breakfast radio. Now I've interviewed people like Tim Smith in the past, and it gives me an insight into that must be a really interesting lifestyle. What's it like to work in that sort of a radio team?
Oh, wow. When I was young and I first was starting out, and I worked with Timbo and Betters in their breakfast heyday on Triple M. And then I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to land the job as Eddie Maguire's newsreader on Triple M's Hot Breakfast for, I think it was about 4 years. I initially planned to do 2 years, but I stayed for about 4. It was exciting. It was at times overwhelming. We'd get in there, and as soon as you walk through those doors of a morning, your feet barely touched the ground. It was just head down, bum up, go, diving in, finding the big stories of the day, because part of my role with Eddie's show was not just presenting the news, but also there was a crossover where if a big story was breaking, I'd often go into the studio and we'd chat about the stories that were making news. And that, for me, I initially found quite nerve-wracking, because I've often said to people, if the words there on the prompt are written down in front of me, I'm fine, absolutely fine. But when I have to ad lib and do things off the cuff, sometimes that can be really, really intimidating and really difficult. But Eddie makes it quite easy, because he is very laid back and relaxed in his style. But I remember one of the first times I had to do that, I went into the studio and, there's Luke Darcy standing there, and there's Mick Malloy there, and there's Eddie there, and just thinking, oh my gosh, this is my life. How did I get here? Kid from Currumborough. But I'm standing there, and the story was something to do with a police pursuit, I think, the night before, and some kids had stolen a car and they'd been clocked at speeds of, 200 k's an hour on the Westgate or wherever they had taken this car. And Eddie wanted to know in great detail, the make, the model, the colour of the car. And I thought, oh, gee whiz, I just had to really be on the ball. And Eddie is such a hard taskmaster, and he would be the first to admit to you, I demand professionalism, and if you work for me, then you need to be on the ball, and I respect that, and I think that has made me a better journalist.
Yeah, and I think what that comes to is that, as I mentioned at the top, it really is a craft. It's like anything else, really, isn't it? It's a craft, and you have to learn how to do it. And one of the things you have to learn to do is where to source your news from. It's certainly a skill that I've had to learn. Like you've got to work out how to compose, how to put a bulletin together, and how to structure that. I mean, what do you think makes a good news bulletin?
Well, the landscape's changed so much from when I began, Steve, and the sources, where we source our stories from, has changed so much from when I began. I mean, when I started, there was no internet and there was no social media. And I was working with Tony Jones at Gold 104. He was doing the sport on Gold 104, breakfast, and then he would go and spend a full day doing his day job at Channel 9 Sport. And one day there was a story breaking about, it was back when Melbourne was one of the cities that was up to host the Olympic Games. I seem to remember there was some alleged sabotage type scandal going on. And I remember watching Tony get the Telstra white pages, because that's all we had, none of this internet business.
Oh, those were the days.
Found a number through directory assistance, and I think he ended up speaking to the IOC's Phil Coles, but he managed to track this guy down. I think it was in somewhere up in one of the beachside suburbs of Sydney, and got him on the phone, on the landline. I thought, this man's incredible. That's just incredible journalism, the way you've achieved that. But as time has gone on, the news cycle has become almost 24/7 now. It's not just, your 6 o'clock news. You sit down, you watch it on the telly, and then you disseminate that and you go into work the next day. I think it's become a lot more complicated. There are so many more sources, but how many of these sources are credible, and where do we choose our news, and how do we know it's a solid source? It's all a little bit confusing, but we used to rely quite heavily on Australian Associated Press, on the Wires service. But now we always, with breakfast news, we would have all the TV networks up. We have big screens in the newsroom, ready to record if there was breaking news, if something flashed up. And we have correspondents around the world, around the country. It's all one big grapevine, Steve, but it's sort of disseminating the news. And Twitter kind of muddied the waters a bit, because sometimes, on Twitter you'd occasionally see someone say, oh, such and such has died. I think, okay, who's this? Where's this? And let's verify this. We've all now, with the advent of our phones and phone cameras, we've all become on-the-spot reporters, haven't we?
It's a different universe.
Yeah.
My very special guest on the Clear Signal this week is newsreader extraordinaire Sarah Patterson. Stick around, folks. We'll be right back after this.
The Clear Signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal with me, Steve Visscher. Great to have you with us this week. My very special guest is our voiceover person, in fact, Sarah Patterson. Sarah, we talk a little bit about the way things used to be and the way news was gathered, and the technology of broadcasting has changed and careers change. And I see now, I'm a bit passionate about this next subject, because I see a lot of people from radio going into podcasting, and you and your husband, Kevin Hillier, who's, had a moderate amount of radio experience. Let's just be honest.
Just moderate, yeah.
Just moderate. You've both really embraced podcasting, and of course, we talk about the Food Bites podcast, which you and he present every week, for example.
Well, just a few years ago, Steve, I didn't even know what podcasts were. Somebody suggested that I do one, because Food Bites used to be a newspaper column in Star newspapers in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and Star newspapers discontinued the column, and that was when it was suggested to me that I pursue podcasts, turn Food Bites into a podcast. So I had to check out what podcasts actually were first.
Yeah.
And then Kevin and I did indeed decide to turn it into a podcast, and 300 plus episodes later, here we are.
Yes, very well produced too, I must say.
Absolutely. Well, you've been absolutely a vital cog in the wheel. You were there from day one.
Oh, it is. It's interesting. I've actually learned a lot about presenting myself just by producing that show. I think I did about 250 odd of them, I think. Yeah. And It's an interesting podcast, I think, because it's one that really blends radio experience with podcasting. A lot of people come into podcasting, and I was one of those people who, thought, gee whiz, this would be a great idea. And you realise very quickly that it actually takes a lot. I mean, anybody can make a podcast. If you've got a microphone and a laptop, anyone can do it. But it actually takes a bit of skill to present one professionally and put it together and make it sound really good.
I agree. And once again, it's a case of being confident in your own ability to ad lib and just hold a conversation, not worry about what's written in front of you. For me, that was a great challenge. And Kevin has always been hugely supportive and encouraging on that side of it with me, saying, Sarah, you have no idea what you're capable of doing until you try it. And I get to exercise my journalistic skills because I get to ask questions of the most wonderful and varied array of guests. We've had some incredible ones. I mean, the most recent one is Australia's most successful competitive eater, James Webb. He eats for Australia, literally.
Do you know, my wife and I, we have a bit of a strange addiction to watching these professional food eaters. There's a couple of them around that do really well on YouTube, but we actually sat down and watched a couple of that gentleman's videos the other day. Now, I'm a big guy, Sarah, you know this, but I could not put away that much food in a week, and they're doing it in a session.
Oh, it's crazy. And when he talked about his training method, which is, I think he calls stomach stretching or stretch training, where he goes and just basically devours, a buffet. An entire buffet until his stomach is stretched to the point. It's like a balloon. When a balloon is stretched to capacity, it almost starts to turn white and gets really thin. And he said that's what's happened to his stomach. And he does that to increase his capacity.
Yeah, and if you notice how fit these people are, there's a gentleman in the UK, his name's Adam Moran. His channel's called Beard Meets Foods. This guy is as skinny as a rake. And there's another lady that we watch every week called Katina Eats Kilos as her channel. Anyway, I'm actually hoping we'll get her on as a guest at some point on the show. She is tiny and she is so fit, and the amount of food these people can put away is astonishing.
Yeah, that's what amazed us, because we just assumed that if you ate that amount of food, you'd be a reasonably large person. But more often than not, these people are gym addicts, and they're very fit, and they're actually quite small and petite.
Oh, dear. I mean, just talking more broadly about, Food Bites, you've had so many guests on from all parts of the media, and I find that the interviews are sort of partially about food, that's sort of blended in, but also they've got a backstory as well, which is always really, really interesting, and it's the craft of being able to tell or have them tell that story.
That's the beauty of Food Bites and having food as a starting point, because we've all got to eat, right? So it's a great icebreaker, and it just leads us then into, well, wherever our guest wants to go. It's all very loosely arranged around food, but we've had some guests give us some incredible insights, which as far as I'm aware, haven't been publicised elsewhere on occasion. So yeah, no, we're really proud of it, and we're really proud of the fact that it's just a conversation. We're all just regular people at the end of the day. Whether you be a celebrity, whether you be a brain surgeon, we're all just people with the same wants, same needs, all got to eat, and it's a nice opportunity for people to show us a different side of themselves.
Oh, we should probably stop talking about food, because just quietly, I've actually started a diet this week, so I'm actually really rather hungry. So anyway, we should move on.
Oh, no, we don't diet, Steve. Life's too short for that.
Yes. I think Garfield the cat said it best when he says diet is die with a T. But anyway, I digress. Hey, Sarah, I wanted to talk a bit about tree changes and career changes, because you've actually found a really just recently a new passion. You're moving house and moving back to a country location, and it's given you a bit of a different take on life, it seems. Yeah,
well, we have done a career tree change, or I have, and we've done the sea change in terms of moving back down to South Gippsland and the Victorian coast. We love it down here, but I have become more involved in the disability sector of late, which is something I hadn't planned. It one of those things in life that happens by chance. But it's an area I'm really passionate about, Steve, because without going into great detail, family members are impacted by disability, autism specifically, and we have a independent living skills program running down here at Inverloch once a week at the Inverloch RSL. The RSL has been incredibly supportive, and basically what it is, it's an initiative of a wonderful business called 100 Mile Foodie. It's run by Marlene Hoff, who is a hospitality trainer and a chef, and she's passionate about local, ethical and sustainably sourced food, and that's where the name 100 Mile Foodie comes from. It pertains to the food and where it's sourced from and the proximity to where you live. The Wednesday programs, we have young people who come along. They learn basic cooking skills, how to prepare healthy moods. We all need a healthy mood.
Well,
healthy meals, food storage, hygiene, and the day is also, interspersed with little social opportunities along the way. It's just a lovely group, and it's a lovely day and experience, especially for young people whose goal might be supported employment within the town. And we hope that this weekly class can help them achieve that. And if that's not the goal, then just helping them to achieve independent living and looking after themselves. They're just such a great bunch. And I sometimes, it frustrates me. We say, Steve, that we've come so far in the disability sector when it comes to support, but sometimes I question that, and I question people's attitudes. Just because you might be wired differently doesn't make you less. In fact, these young people have abilities you would absolutely blow your mind and would be an asset to any company.
Yeah, and I think, we talked before about having confidence on radio, but I think one of these, the aim of a program like this too is to, really engender confidence in people who might not have that level of confidence before. And I find, I have friends that work in a similar sector up here, and you see such great joy, not only in the people that are receiving the program themselves, but in the people that are involved in it more generally. I mean, it's really quite a joyous thing.
Oh, it absolutely is. And, just speaking of radio, 20, 30 years ago, I don't know that the industry would have embraced neurodiversity in the way it does now. We see people who are neurodivergent enjoying roles on air, off air, and just absolutely kicking goals both in work and in life. And that's what we want to celebrate. And this is what the 100 Mile Foodie initiative is doing. And we hope more people get involved. We've actually just started recently holding Devonshire teas on a Tuesday at the RSL, where these young people, I know, Steve, these scones, I'm telling you now, they are the fluffiest, most beautiful, freshly baked scones you are ever going to taste. And they're served with 100 Mile Foodie's own signature jams and preserves and freshly whipped cream. What more could you ask for, Steve?
I could ask to not be on the diet I just mentioned before.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no. Sarah, it's been great to catch up with you. I've so looked forward to doing this interview, and I wanted to thank you too, just publicly on my show, for the help and the mentorship that you and Kevin have provided me over the journey in media, which has been a real fascination for me for many years. So it's great to be doing this, and I want to acknowledge the help that you guys have given me. So thank you for that.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Steve, and our thanks to you too for being such a vital part of Food Bites, and congratulations on your show, The Clear Signal. I think it's going to be a huge success, and I think you've found your happy place, and you have a gift for doing this. And onward and upward. I hope it all goes really well.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And just before we wrap up, I really appreciate that. Howdypartnersmedia.com.au for all your media needs, of course.
All your media needs. And if I could, Steve, if you're interested anyone's interested in the 100 Mile Foodie program, 100milefoodie.com.au.
Fantastic. And I think they're on Facebook too, so we can always look them up there. Sarah Patterson, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk again soon.
Pleasure.
And, of course, the organisation Sarah mentioned there, the 100 Mile Foodie, you can find them at 100milefoodie.com.au, and that's the number 100 and then Mile Foodie. And those sort of organisations do really, really vital and important work in the community, and I'd really urge you to support them and get yourself a good feed. As I mentioned, don't be on a diet like I am right now, but when you're not, I'm sure it's a great food option. So make sure you go out and support them when you can. Coming up after the break, we'll be talking to Australia's First Lady of Finance, Karen Hecht.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
It's certainly not much of a stretch right now to say that, boy, times are tight, aren't they? And I don't think it really matters what part of society you're in. Everyone's feeling the pinch. High interest rates, high grocery prices, ridiculously high energy bills, let's face it, and there's so many other things. It's really flowing on into consumer confidence, and it's really hurting a lot of people in a lot of ways. It's probably little comfort at times when you hear people in my age group, and of course I'm in my 50s, saying things like, and I guess also to paraphrase one of my favourite sci-fi series lines where it goes, all of this has happened before and it'll happen again. We did kind of live through this towards the end of the 80s, if you can remember back that far, but I'm sure many of you are not quite as old as I am, but anyway. It does tend to run in cycles, though, and we really are at the sharp end of one now. It's no exaggeration to say that. So what do we do about that? What's going on with interest rates, and what budget tips can we take on board to get us through until things do get better? Karen Hecht is a long-time mortgage broker and someone who's helped a lot of people over the time get through times like this. So she joins us on the line now. G'day, Karen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, gee whiz, you've been in finance for a long, long time. I know this, but, we've seen good times and challenging times. I think it's pretty fair to say that finance is on everybody's mind at the moment. Times are tough.
Times are a little tough, unfortunately. A lot of people are feeling the pinch, and it doesn't matter whether you're a renter, a homeowner, or someone with multiple investment properties. Everybody's feeling it right now.
So what do we think about now? I have this theory, and I don't know what you think about this, but interest rates, obviously, they're called variable for a reason, obviously, and we know they go up and down, but tight times like this, I can remember back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, where we seemed to be going through a similar sort of challenging period. I suppose the big difference between now and then is that the amounts of money that people have to borrow to get into a house these days is significantly higher.
Correct. I don't think we'll see rates go as high as we did back then. I remember that was around the time I bought my first house and my honeymoon rate was 16%. I don't think people could cope with that sort of interest rate now. Certainly, if rates get much higher, we will start seeing people having to sell their homes. And, they just won't be able to afford to keep them. But I think we'll also see investors having to sell, because there's a lot of pressure on investors at the moment to create better standards for their tenants. And if you're doing that at the same time interest rates are going up and tenants can't really afford to keep increasing their rents to help meet these costs, we're really going to see a lot of properties go on the market if interest rates keep going.
It seems to me philosophically that the Reserve Bank has one hammer that it can use to squash inflation. But I wonder, just philosophically at least, the difference between the last time we went through something like this and now is that in that time the economy was really overheated. I don't know that it really was. There are factors now that are pushing up the CPI, if you like, that are really outside your average consumer's control. For example, fuel prices, energy prices. You have to wonder what they're thinking sometimes, putting interest rates up as well. It's not going to stop those things from happening. That's more a policy thing that's causing that.
Well, that's so true. When they put up interest rates, the whole thought behind it is that if they make home loans more expensive, people will stop spending so much. But they really are only affecting about a third of the population directly, because there are a lot of people who don't have a mortgage, whether they're tenants or living at home or already paid off their mortgage. So it's only about a third of the population that's actually affected directly by raising interest rates, but it does stop them from spending as much. It makes them think twice about having that holiday overseas or, buying a brand name handbag or shoes rather than just shopping locally. And so it does help cut back and reduce inflation, but it can only go so far. I feel like they've cut back so far already that there's really not much more that can happen. So even if they keep putting up interest rates now, people can't cut back their spending much more than they already are.
Now, in the home loan market rate, you work as a mortgage broker, of course, and you would see, people come to people such as yourself when they're seeking better deals. I wonder what this does to competition in the market. Has it intensified it? Are you seeing a lot more people coming in, really looking for better deals, or has it sort of stayed pretty constant?
Probably in the first 12 months or so when rates were going up month after month after month, and everybody really felt the pinch very quickly and rapidly. It changed. So a lot of people at that point were wanting to change banks because interest rates had gone up, and the banks actually assess their affordability criteria at about 3% above the normal rates. It was making it really hard for people to refinance. And, there was kind of a bit of a catchphrase going around that you were a mortgage prisoner because you couldn't actually change banks. So then the banks started changing some of their policies and allowing you to have just a 1% buffer instead of a 3% buffer, which meant you could actually afford to change much more easily. And there was a few rules around that. And it was certainly important to be able to demonstrate to the bank that the new loan was going to have a cheaper interest rate than the old loan. But I am finding that over the last 12 months, people are kind of getting used to the fact that rates are high and they've had to adjust their spending already. And rates haven't changed as much in the last 12 months. So I'm not seeing as much of it now as what we were seeing a couple of years ago.
So inflation being what it is, and, we see this news every month. The Reserve Bank has its meeting and there's all sorts of talk about what they will do and what they won't do. And it seems hard to predict. But as we're sitting here recording this now, the inflation rate seems to be outside of their target band. So now we might be at risk of interest rates going up even more. But I wonder, they must be at or close to their peak now, surely. We can't go on like this.
Well, I hope you're right. Nobody really knows. Unfortunately, when it comes to interest rates, anyone who thinks they can predict the next move, whether it be up, down or sideways, they're really guessing. Nobody really knows, because I feel like society is starting to hurt. We've had the flow on now that interest rates, when they first change, it's a direct response with people who have mortgages. But then there's more of a flow on that's indirect, where those people stop going out for dinner as much and they stop spending as much in the local shops. And therefore those business owners start to feel it. And people aren't spending as much making their homes prettier. They're not buying new curtains and they're not buying new flooring. And so those businesses are now affected, and those not only business owners are affected, but the employees aren't getting the overtime and aren't getting the commissions. And so it is flowing on to be affecting a lot wider community now. But I certainly feel that a lot of people are really hitting hard now. And with the cost of, like you say, petrol and electricity and all these things that are completely out of our control, they're going up and up and up with nothing we can do about it. So I'm actually seeing a lot of people coming to me now needing help in a different way. And I've actually started a new branch of my business where I'm helping people with their budgeting, because people are really struggling to manage. And it's a big issue that's come to the forefront, that nobody's been taught to budget when you're in school, or, even when you go to the bank and apply for a home loan, nobody says, well, have you thought about how this needs to impact your spending? And over time, as interest rates go up, certainly nobody's coming back to everyone saying, well, hey, do you know how to manage your money to be able to afford these increased expenses? So it's tough times.
Now, budgeting is a really interesting topic, isn't it? Because we live in an era now, which is, I think, different from the time when you and I grew up, where if you wanted something, well, you know what, you'd save for it and you'd put money away. Or at the worst, you might do a lay-by. I don't even know if young people these days would even know what a lay-by is, where you put something away and you pay it off, and you don't get it till you've paid it off. But these days we have all our little afterpays and our Klarnas and things like that. Do you find a lot of people are falling into those sort of little hardcore debt traps?
Very much so, because when they apply for these things like Zip Pay and Afterpay, we call them buy now, pay later. And it's equivalent of the old lay-by, except that you get to take it home straight away. And so what happens is then they're committing to payments over the next couple of months that may potentially be much higher than what they can really afford if something unexpected comes up during that time. Maybe a insurance renewal comes up, or, council rates, or someone gets sick and there's suddenly some medical expenses, and these unexpected expenses come in at a time when they're having to repay these things that they committed to 2 months ago. And it is putting people in hardship. And I've actually recently spoken with someone who was considering going bankrupt because they had 4 different buy now, pay laters that had gotten completely out of hand. And it's a really awful thing to see happen when, you're not expecting the unexpected when you first go and sign up for these things.
So I suppose one really handy budgeting tip there is to talk about the concept of discipline. If you're going to go into this sort of system, and a lot of people do it, you've got to really put that into your budget and make sure you pay that stuff off, because otherwise it just sits there. And just as an extra question to that, I mean, how does the finance industry look at that when you're going for a loan? How do the banks look at if you've got lots of afterpays and the like?
Well, actually, those sorts of finance make it very difficult to get a loan, whether you're asking for a car loan or a credit card, or whether you're going for something bigger like a home loan. Those things that seems little. It might be that your buy now, pay later only has a $1,000 limit on it. And you think, oh, surely that's nothing. That's not going to have much effect. Except that if it's a pay in 4 facility, that means $250 a fortnight. And that is actually quite a substantial repayment. So it does have a very big impact, and it can affect credit scores really negatively as well, because the credit reporting agencies think that, oh, if you need to do these things, then you must be in hardship already. So they deduct a whole heap of points off your score when you're actually applying for more than one of these things. So it's a bigger impact that people don't really consider at the time when they're applying to have these types of credit.
And I would assume too that when times are tough, I mean, everybody's got a credit card. Are you finding that people are racking up more credit card debt perhaps than they once were? I mean, sometimes they've got to do it just to get by.
Absolutely. I'm seeing less and less people who pay their card in full every month. So that means that people are paying a lot more interest on their credit cards now. And once your credit card is maxed out, it's much harder to increase the limit, but it's also much harder to pay it down because of the amount of interest that's being charged each month. So it is a trap. It's a big trap. And I always say to everyone, if you're going to have a credit card, and especially if the only purpose is really to get points so that you can travel, then you really want to make sure that your credit card doesn't have a limit any bigger than what your monthly net income is, because you want to make sure you can always pay it off in full without paying interest.
As it's quite often said, if you can't pay your credit card off at the end of the month, then you're probably living beyond your means. And I think that sort of dovetails there in what you're saying.
Absolutely. And we all have unexpected things come up. Someone gets sick and goes to hospital and suddenly there's extra fees. Someone gets sick and needs to take time off work, and they might have a period of time without income if they don't have enough holiday pay or sick pay. It happens. Unexpected things happen, and credit cards can be a godsend in those periods of time when, suddenly 2 or 3 bills come in all at once and you haven't got the money put aside. So credit cards have their place, that's for sure. It's not always a bad thing, but I feel that people are using them way too much, and they're becoming a habit to have them at their limit. So they're just paying way too much interest.
We're talking all things finance and budgeting this week with Karen Hecht, Australia's First Lady of Finance. Karen, I've always kind of liked that tagline that you use. It's pretty cool.
Thank you. I've earned that tag, being the first mortgage broker in Victoria. Well, the first female mortgage broker. There were some other men around before I started, but I'm very proud of that tag.
It's a great tagline. Hey, times are tight and things will get better again. I mean, if you've been through this before, you know that things are going to get better. But in the interim, what are some other budgeting tips that you could recommend to people, to help them get through while things, are expensive at the moment?
There's a number of things I recommend to my clients. Firstly, have a separate savings account. Have one of those online savers that doesn't have direct ATM access, so that if you want to take money out of it, you've got to really think about it and You know you're taking money out. It's not an accident. And with those accounts, if you're at a point where you're not really saving, just start by every time you get a pay packet, put $10 in. And after a little while, you won't even notice that $10 is gone, because really that's only 1 or 2 less coffees a week, you know. So if you start with $10 and then you find you can increase it to 20 and then maybe 50. And over time, you might actually even start saving $100 every time you get paid. And you just put it away and forget you've got it and live off what's left. And that creates an emergency buffer. So then when something unexpected happens, you've actually got a little bit of money, but over time it'll do much more than an emergency buffer, because it helps them then save for a holiday or upgrading a car or even upgrading a mobile phone. We need to do that, you know, every couple of years, it seems. So it's nice to be able to, you know, pay cash for that and not have your monthly expenses increased when you're paying your phone off. So there's lots of little tips I can go on forever with, but they're probably the main ones that I say to people straight up. And have a look at how many monthly subscriptions you have to things like Spotify, Netflix, Stan, KO. There's a number of those. People sign up to them because they want to watch a particular series or movie, and then they forget about it and keep paying it for months later when they've stopped using it. So
guilty as charged.
That is a really common one. People spending an extra $15 or $20 a month they don't need to be spending on something that they've stopped using long ago.
And all those things add up, as you say. And, you know, I suppose one of the other things that people think about is, or could think about is, you know, that discretionary spending, that really cool consumer gadget or whatever it is that you really want. Well, maybe now's not the time to get it, or that fancy new car. You know, we can always, most of us can make sure that car, you know, can stay on the road an extra year or something and not take on all that extra debt. Because one thing I have found, Karen, we talk about home loans that are hard to get sometimes, but it seems to me if you want to go out and get a car, it is still quite easy to get finance and do that. You know, car dealers, they're very good at being able to package that all in when you walk into the dealership. So that can be a trap to fall into.
Very true. Very true. Most people need a car to get to work. So I'm not ever one to judge people when they've got to upgrade their car and they get a car loan. However, there's a big difference between paying $20,000 for a car or paying $50,000. And I see a lot of people now paying over $100,000 just for a car. So I feel like if you haven't got any savings and you're not able to contribute at all to the purchase, then you really should be considering having the cheapest purchase possible so that you're not having to pay it off. Because by the time you pay off that car, you might have even paid 50% more. So that $100,000 car just became a $150,000 car by the time you've paid it off.
Yeah, you could buy a very good Cessna for that if I just put my aviation hat on. That'd be money far better spent in my view.
Is a Cessna more important than a car?
Well, if you're me, it probably is. But anyway, that's a whole nother story for a whole nother radio show. Karen, do you see a lot of young people getting it? I know, you know, my children are in their 20s. My son, for example, is in his mid-20s, and he kind of despairs at times. Dad, he's got a good job and he's paying, you know, but he's paying a lot of rent because of supply and demand issues. How do you find young people are coming in, and are they worried about how they'll ever afford a house in this environment?
Absolutely. I've got clients coming to me who are already pre-approved for their loans, so we know the bank will give them enough money to buy a house, but they're coming to me and saying, I'm not so sure I can afford these repayments. How do I manage my money so that I can actually make those repayments fit in my lifestyle? And people are actually really getting quite scared of that. And it's really unfortunate that society these days seems to want everything yesterday. I know when I bought my first house, there was no floor coverings, there was no window coverings, there was no front fence, there was no garage. It was a basic 3-bedroom house. And over time, we put in the floor coverings and the window coverings. But now people expect their first time to have all these things straight up, and they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves to have a much more expensive home than potentially what we would have expected when we were buying our first home. So I feel it's really sad that people are putting this pressure on themselves. It is still possible to buy cheaper homes, and it is still possible to move maybe just an extra 20 minutes or half an hour further out in order to be able to find something a bit more affordable. But there's so much pressure for them to live close to work and have the sort of home you or I would expect to have after having worked 30 years.
It's certainly different times, and I think a lot of that comes into rampant consumerism. And I think one of the things I hope we will learn out of these times is that as things get better again, we take some of the lessons that we are learning now while times are tight and applying them when times aren't so tight.
Yes, agreed, because that's how you save and get ahead. You know, I love when I speak to people who come to me and say, oh, look, our home loan's almost paid off and I only owe about 100,000 now and I've got all this equity. Do you think maybe it's time for an investment property? And I love hearing that because it's quite rare these days. 20 years ago, people had a lot more equity in their home because their number one focus was to pay the mortgage off. But it's not so common these days. And it would be really nice to see people going back to the older style of don't buy something unless you can pay cash. Unless it's a car or a home, you don't borrow money. You don't use a credit card unless it's an emergency. I would really like to see people going back to some of these fundamentals that you and I grew up with.
Karen, just as we wrap up here, the role of mortgage brokers in the industry, it's a really interesting way to go about getting a home loan. I found I've used brokers in the past and I mean, personally, just speaking from experience, I find that a really convenient way to do it.
Well, I think there is a very important role for brokers because there's a lot of banks out there that you would never know about if you didn't go to a broker. So even the likes of ING, we've all heard of ING for their fantastic online saver account. But if you want to get a mortgage from them, they don't have mobile lenders roaming around. And there's a lot of lenders out there like that who actually have cheaper interest rates than the Big Four. So if suddenly there was no mortgage brokers to offer these alternatives, the Big Four could do anything they like with interest rates and there'd be no competition to hold them back.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there and a lot to think about. Karen, where can people find you online if they want to find out some more information?
Well, there's a number of ways through Facebook and Instagram, but also directly through saveymortgages.com.au. That leads through to a loan market website that has lots of calculators and all sorts of things to help people decide what their costs will be and what they can afford to be spending. So some great little tools on there to play with. But certainly I'd love to have a chat with anyone who's thinking about buying a home, whether they're concerned about what their repayments will be or whether they're simply concerned about what they can afford to borrow, then I'd love to have a chat.
Karen, it's been so great catching up with you talking finance. We hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's been a pleasure being here with you. Thank you.
Oh, well, there's so many tips there to unpack. And, it's interesting you talk about having things like your little subscriptions to all these different services. I am really guilty of that. I've got heaps of them. And maybe I might take that bit of advice away as a good starting point. Anyway, thanks to Karen Hecht for joining us. Some great information there. Thanks also to Sarah Patterson for dropping in for a great chat today about her career in radio. Wasn't that really interesting to listen to? And you'll hear Sarah reading the news here and there on Australian independent radio news. I know many stations around Australia do take that service. And also make sure you catch her on the Food Bites with Sarah Patterson podcast. Always great listening there. That's everything we have for you on this week's edition of The Clear Signal. Great to have you with us. Have a great week, folks, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.